I spent 10 years convincing myself it was just a stupid, pathetic phase. A cliché crush on my best friend's older brother that I'd eventually outgrow. Then the front door unlocked. He walked in looking like 10 miles of bad road. And every lie I ever told myself instantly evaporated. The basement smelled like cheap weed, damp concrete, and the lingering regret of a wasted Tuesday afternoon. Toby was sprawled across the sagging futon, aggressively mashing the buttons on his controller, completely oblivious to the suffocating July humidity pressing against the tiny window wells. I was sitting on the floor, picking at a frayed thread on the rug, trying to decide if it was too early to go home. At 23, killing time in your best friend's basement starts to feel less like a hobby and more like a symptom of a larger failure. If this guy snipes me one more time, I'm putting my foot through the television, Toby muttered, his eyes glued to the screen. You missed him 3 times, Toby. You brought this on yourself. I leaned back against the cold cinder block wall. Upstairs, the heavy oak front door groaned open. Heavy footsteps hit the hardwood. Toby didn't even blink. Did my mom say she was coming home for lunch? No, I said, frowning. The footsteps didn't sound like Mrs. Wood's. They were too heavy, deliberate, but dragging slightly. Boot heels. Toby finally paused his game, the sudden silence in the basement making the noises upstairs sound deafening. We shared a look. The kind of look you share when you're trying to figure out if you need to grab a baseball bat. Toby stood up, tossing the controller onto the cushion. I followed him up the narrow, carpeted stairs. The living room was cast in the murky yellow light of drawn curtains. Standing in the center of the room, dropping a faded canvas duffel bag onto the floor, was Coulter. I stopped breathing. My lungs just quit. Coulter Woods was supposed to be in Seattle. He was supposed to be climbing the corporate ladder at some tech firm, living the untouchable, perfect life he'd been aggressively building since he left our suffocating hometown 6 years ago. He didn't look perfect now. He looked exhausted. His jaw was covered in a rough, uneven scruff that bordered on a beard. The sharp, arrogant angles of his face, the ones I used to trace in my memory when I couldn't sleep, were blunted by dark, bruised-looking shadows under his eyes. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt that hung a little too loose on his frame, like he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. Toby broke the silence with a loud, entirely uncynical shout. "Coulter, what the hell, man? You didn't say you were coming?" Toby closed the distance and threw his arms around his older brother. Coulter flinched slightly, a microscopic tightening of his shoulders before awkwardly patting Toby's back. "Yeah, surprise," Coulter said. His voice was gravelly, lower than I remembered. It vibrated right down to the soles of my shoes. He pulled away from Toby and looked past him, his eyes locked onto mine. I had spent my entire adolescence meticulously building armor against this exact person. I had practiced a cool, detached indifference in the mirror. I had dated other guys, moved out, gotten a degree, all to prove to myself that the desperate, suffocating infatuation I had for Coulter Woods was dead and buried. But looking at him now, standing in his childhood living room, looking completely broken, the armor didn't just crack. It shattered. "Hey, Lazaro," Coulter said quietly. "Coulter," I nodded, shoving my hands deep into the pockets of my jeans so he wouldn't see my fingers twitch. "You look like garbage." A corner of his mouth twitched upward, the ghost of a smile. "Good to see you too, man." Toby was already buzzing around him like a hyperactive golden retriever. "How long are you staying? Did you get time off? Mom is going to flip out. Let me text her." Don't text her yet, Coulter said quickly, rubbing the back of his neck. I want to get a shower and figure out how to explain this first. Explain what? Toby asked, completely missing the heavy, suffocating tension radiating off his brother. I moved back, Toby, Coulter said, looking out the window, avoiding our eyes. I quit the job, broke the lease. I'm back. Toby cheered, completely oblivious to the utter defeat in Coulter's voice. I wasn't oblivious. I watched Coulter's hand grip the strap of his duffel bag until his knuckles went white. He was 28, back in his parents' house, and looking like a guy who had just watched his entire life burn to the ground. I should have felt bad for him. I should have offered a sympathetic platitude. Instead, a terrifying, selfish spark ignited in my chest. He was back. I should get going, I said, stepping toward the door. I needed air. I needed to not be in the same room as him. You don't have to leave, Coulter said. The words came out faster than he probably intended. He finally looked at me again, and the sheer exhaustion in his brown eyes pinned me to the floor. Unless you have somewhere to be. I've got a shift at the bookstore in an hour, I lied. The lie tasted like ash. Toby, I'll hit you up later. I walked past Coulter, keeping exactly 2 feet of distance between us. Even then, I could smell the faint scent of stale coffee, old leather, and a sharp, metallic tang of nervous sweat. I practically sprinted to my car. When I slammed the door shut and gripped the steering wheel, my hands were shaking violently. It pissed me off. It pissed me off how easily he dismantled my peace of mind just by existing in the same zip code. I turned the key, the engine sputtering to life, and I swore to myself I was going to keep my distance. He was a train wreck. I didn't need to get caught in the collateral damage. 3 weeks passed, and my vow to keep my distance spectacularly failed. It turns out it's impossible to avoid your best friend's brother when he refuses to leave the house. Coulter had become a fixture on the Woods' back porch. He had secured a job doing overnight inventory at a massive hardware warehouse, a colossal step down from his Seattle tech firm, but he didn't seem to care. He slept during the day, woke up in the late afternoon, and sat on the decaying wooden deck, smoking cigarettes and drinking cheap lager until it was time to clock in. Toby, meanwhile, had recently downloaded a new dating app and subsequently fell off the face of the earth, spending every waking moment desperately chasing a girl who worked at a local veterinary clinic. Which meant whenever I came over to retrieve a borrowed jacket or grab a game I'd left behind, Toby wasn't there. But Coulter was. It was a Tuesday evening, pushing 9 o'clock. The heat of the day had finally broken, leaving behind a thick, sticky twilight. I walked around the side of the Woods house, aiming for the back door. Coulter was sitting on the top step of the porch, a cigarette clamped between his lips, trying to unscrew the casing of a broken toaster with a rusted Phillips head screwdriver. He was wearing basketball shorts and a white tank top. His skin was slick with sweat in the humid air, the muscles in his forearms bunching as he struggled with a stripped screw. You know, you can just buy a new toaster for like $15, I said, leaning against the wooden railing. He didn't look up, but his shoulders relaxed. It's the principle of the thing, Lazaro. This machine has a single function. Heat bread. It shouldn't just give up. Things break, Coulter. He finally stopped twisting the screwdriver and looked up at me through the curl of cigarette smoke. The shadows under his eyes hadn't entirely faded, but some of the haunted, desperate look was gone, replaced by a quiet, simmering resignation. Yeah, they do. He flicked his cigarette into an empty coffee can by his feet, He gestured to the cooler sitting next to him. "Toby's out. Grab a beer if you want." I should have said no. I had my jacket in my hands. I had zero reason to stay. I sat down on the step next to him, leaving about a foot of space between us, and reached into the icy water of the cooler. The cold glass of the bottle felt like a shock to the system against my hot palms. I popped the cap off on the edge of the railing. We sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers, but the heavy, loaded silence of two people who know they are circling an invisible drain. The crickets in the overgrown backyard were screaming. "So," I finally said, taking a sip of the terrible beer, "you're really just staying, doing night shifts at the warehouse? Are you asking if I'm a permanent failure or just a temporary one?" His tone was dry, completely devoid of self-pity. "I'm just asking." Coulter set the screwdriver down and leaned his elbows on his knees, staring out into the dark yard. Seattle was a mistake, or maybe I was the mistake in Seattle. I spent 5 years playing a role. The aggressive climbing, the networking, pretending I actually gave a damn about software logistics. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. I woke up one morning, looked at my expensive apartment, my expensive suit, and my expensive boyfriend, and realized I couldn't breathe. I carefully kept my expression neutral, though my stomach did a violent flip at the mention of the boyfriend. Toby had briefly mentioned Coulter was seeing a guy named Ryan, but Toby had zero interest in the details of his brother's love life, so information had been scarce. "What happened to the boyfriend?" I asked, aiming for casual and landing somewhere near interrogative. "Ryan." Coulter said the name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "He liked the idea of me, the version of me that wore a tie and brought home a 6-figure salary. When I told him I was having a breakdown and wanted to quit, he looked at me like I'd just confessed to a murder." Coulter turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto mine. The intensity of his gaze in the dim porch light was physical. It felt like a hand pressing against my chest. He told me I was being weak, so I packed a bag while he was at work, left my keys on the counter, and drove until I hit the state line. "That's brutal," I said quietly. "It was necessary." Coulter shifted, moving slightly closer. The heat radiating off him was palpable. "I'm done pretending to be something I'm not, Lazaro. I'm done performing." He reached for his own beer. As he did, his knuckles brushed against my knee. It was a fleeting, accidental contact, lasting less than a fraction of a second. But the friction sent a jolt of electricity straight up my spine. My breath hitched. Coulter froze. He didn't pull his hand back immediately. His knuckles lingered, hovering just millimeters from the worn denim of my jeans. The cricket seemed to go dead silent. He slowly looked from his hand, up to my face. The cynical, exhausted older brother mask slipped entirely. For the first time, he wasn't looking at me like Toby's annoying sidekick, or the scrawny kid who used to hang around his garage. He was looking at me like he was actually seeing me. A 23-year-old man. I couldn't look away. I was terrified if I moved. If I blinked, the spell would break and he'd pull away with an awkward laugh. "You got quiet," Coulter murmured, his voice dropping an octave, slipping beneath the ambient noise of the summer night. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "I'm listening." "You're the only one," he said. He finally pulled his hand back, resting it on his own thigh, but the air between us felt permanently altered, dense. Toby just wants me to be the invincible older brother again. My parents look at me like I'm a wounded animal they don't know how to feed, but you—" "Me?" I whispered. "You don't look at me with pity," Coulter said. He leaned back against the porch railing, his eyes slowly dragging down my torso and back up to my face. A slow, deliberate appraisal that made my blood run hot. "You look at me like you actually want me to be exactly where I am." Panic and a thrilling, terrifying spike of adrenaline flooded my system. I was exposed. The cynical armor was completely gone. "Don't flatter yourself, Woods," I managed to say, clinging to sarcasm like a life raft. "I just prefer it when people aren't entirely full of shit." Coulter laughed, a genuine deep sound that startled a bird in the nearby oak tree. He reached out and, with entirely unnecessary slowness, tapped his beer bottle against mine. The glass clinked sharply in the humid night. To not being full of shit then, I drank, hiding my face behind the bottle, knowing with absolute terrifying certainty that if I didn't get off this porch soon, I was going to do something that would destroy my friendship with Toby forever. But my legs refused to move, anchored to the wood by the simple, devastating fact that Coulter Woods was looking at me, and he wasn't looking away. August arrived like a wet wool blanket thrown over the town. The heat was oppressive, stalling out cars and fraying tempers. My avoidance strategy had completely disintegrated. I was basically living at the Woods house again, though the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Toby was barely a ghost, caught up in a whirlwind romance with the vet tech. That left me and Coulter. We fell into a bizarre, unspoken routine. I would finish my shift at the bookstore, drive over, and sit with him on the porch while he geared up for his overnight warehouse shift. We talked about everything and absolutely nothing. He dissected the brutal, hollow reality of corporate Seattle. I complained about the agonizingly slow death of print media and the insufferable regulars at my job. We didn't talk about the night our hands almost touched. We danced around it, stepping carefully over the live wire, humming beneath the floorboards. Then his truck died. It was a Tuesday night, pitch black, raining hard enough to turn the gutters into rivers. Coulter had exactly 40 minutes to clock in. He was standing in the driveway, soaked to the bone, staring at the smoking hood of his ancient Ford. "I'll drive you," I said, shouting over the downpour from the shelter of the porch. He slammed the hood shut, wiping rain and grease from his forehead. He looked furious, cornered. "I can call a cab. It'll take an hour to get here in this weather. Get in my car, Coulter." He didn't argue. He just grabbed his duffel bag and stalked over to my beat-up Honda. The interior of my car instantly smelled like wet denim, cheap soap, and the sharp tang of his frustration. The heater was blasting, trying to combat the sudden chill of the storm. The windshield wipers beat a frantic, rhythmic thud against the glass. I put the car in drive, gripping the steering wheel tight enough to make my knuckles ache. The silence between us was thicker than the humidity. It was aggressive. "Sorry," Coulter finally muttered, staring out the passenger window at the blurred streetlights. "I didn't want to drag you out in this." "It's fine. I wasn't doing anything anyway." "I hate this," he said, his voice dropping, barely audible over the rain. "The truck? Everything." He dragged a hand down his face. "I'm 28, Lazaro. I'm taking a ride to a dead-end job from my little brother's best friend because I can't keep a 15-year-old engine running. It's pathetic." "Stop," I snapped. The word came out sharper than I intended. He looked at me, surprised by the venom in my tone. Stop doing that, I said, keeping my eyes glued to the slick road. Stop performing this tragedy for me. You made a choice. You walked away from a life that was killing you. That isn't pathetic. It's the bravest thing I've seen anyone do. The wipers squeaked. The silence returned, but the aggression was gone. It was replaced by a heavy, suffocating gravity. I pulled into the massive, floodlit parking lot of the warehouse. The sodium lights cast an ugly orange glow through the rain-streaked windows. I killed the engine. "We're here," I said, my voice suddenly tight. Coulter didn't move to open the door. He unbuckled his seatbelt, the click loud in the quiet cab. He shifted his body, turning fully toward me. The space between us in the small car was practically non-existent. I could feel the heat radiating off him. I could hear his slightly elevated breathing. "You really believe that?" he asked. His eyes were entirely black in the dim light, searching my face with a terrifying intensity. "Yeah," I breathed. "I do. Lazaro." He said my name like it was an anchor, a heavy thing keeping him tethered to the earth. He reached out. This time, there was no hesitation, no accidental brushing of knuckles. His large, rough hand closed around the back of my neck. His thumb pressed into the pulse point beneath my jaw. My heart violently slammed against my ribs. I looked at his mouth. He looked at mine. "Tell me to get out of the car," Coulter whispered, his face inches from mine. His breath smelled like peppermint and dark coffee. "Tell me to go clock in, and I will. I swear to God, Lazaro. Just say the word." I couldn't have spoken if my life depended on it. My vocal cords were paralyzed. Instead, I did the only thing my brain was capable of processing. I reached up, grabbed the heavy fabric of his damp t-shirt, and pulled. Coulter crashed into me. There was nothing soft or romantic about it. It was a collision. His mouth was hard, desperate, and tasting faintly of the rain. The angle was awkward, the center console digging into my ribs, but I didn't care. 10 years of suffocated, buried desire ignited in a single, blinding flash. I opened my mouth to him, a ragged gasp escaping my throat as his hand tightened in my hair. He tasted exactly the way I had always imagined. Dark, grounded, utterly overwhelming. He shifted his weight, crowding me against the driver's side door, his other hand gripping my waist, anchoring me to him. It wasn't a sweet, exploratory kiss. It was an excavation. He kissed me like he was trying to find something he'd lost, and I kissed him back with a vicious, demanding urgency. I wanted to erase Seattle. I wanted to erase the ex-boyfriend. I wanted him to understand that right here, in a freezing car, under ugly orange lights, was the most real thing he had ever touched. We finally broke apart, both of us gasping for air. Our foreheads rested against each other. My hands were tangled in his shirt, my chest heaving. Coulter let out a shaky, incredulous breath. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes wide, pupils blown out. "Jesus," he whispered. The warehouse horn blared in the distance, a harsh, mechanical shriek signaling the start of the shift. The real world slammed back into the car. Coulter blinked, the reality of the situation washing over his face. He looked at his hands, then at me. I have to go." "Yeah," I managed to say, my voice completely wrecked. He grabbed his bag, shoved the car door open, and stepped out into the pouring rain. He didn't look back as he jogged toward the metal employee entrance. I sat in the cold car for a full 20 minutes, staring at the spot where he had just been, my lips bruised, and my entire world irrevocably altered. I avoided the Woods house for 3 days. It was cowardice, plain and simple. I convinced myself I had ruined everything. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, dragging Coulter into my own messy baggage right when he was trying to fix his life. I spent 72 hours jumping out of my skin every time my phone buzzed, simultaneously terrified it would be him and devastated when it wasn't. On Thursday afternoon, I was in the back of the bookstore, breaking down cardboard boxes with a box cutter, running entirely on caffeine and anxiety. The bell above the front door chimed. I didn't look up until a shadow fell over the recycling bin. Coulter was standing there. He was wearing his warehouse boots, dark jeans, and a faded flannel shirt. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp, focused. "You don't return texts," he said, flat, factual. I dropped the box cutter. "I've been busy. You've been hiding." He stepped closer, invading my space in the narrow aisle behind the register. The smell of old paper and dust vanished, replaced immediately by the scent of him. "I thought we agreed not to be full of shit, Lazaro." I crossed my arms, trying to build a physical barrier. "What do you want me to say, Coulter? We screwed up. You were stressed. It was raining. It was a mistake." Coulter flinched. The reaction was so fast, so visceral, it broke my heart. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip firm but not painful, pulling me a step closer. "Don't do that," he said, his voice tight. "Don't reduce it to a moment of weakness. I am a lot of things right now. I'm broke. I'm confused. I'm sleeping in my childhood bedroom. But I know exactly what I did in your car. You don't want this," I argued, my voice shaking. "You're just lonely. You're looking for a lifeline, and I'm convenient." "You think you're convenient?" Coulter let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You're my little brother's best friend. You've known me since I was an arrogant teenager. You know exactly how far I've fallen. You are the least convenient person on this planet." He let go of my arm, stepping back, running a hand through his dark hair. "In Seattle, I built a life based on what looked good on paper. I'm done with paper. I want what's real. And when I look at you..." He stopped, swallowing hard. The cynical edge was completely gone. He just looked vulnerable. "When I look at you, I feel like I don't have to pretend. I just want to know if you were kissing me out of pity, or if you actually meant it." The walls I had spent a decade building finally crumbled into dust. I looked at him, the scruff on his jaw, the dark circles under his eyes, the absolute sincerity in his posture, and I knew I was done running. "I meant it," I said quietly. "I've meant it for a really long time." A slow, devastating smile broke across his face. It changed his entire demeanor, shaving 5 years off his age. He took a step forward, closing the distance between us again. "Then stop hiding from me," he murmured. "What about Toby?" The reality of the situation was a massive, immovable boulder in the room. Coulter's smile faded slightly, replaced by a resolute nod. "We tell him. Today. Together. I'm not sneaking around, Lazaro. I'm not hiding you." We went straight to the Woods house after my shift. Toby was sitting on the living room rug, surrounded by pieces of a disassembled mountain bike, grease smeared across his forehead. He looked up as we walked in. "Where have you been?" Toby asked me, tossing a wrench aside. "I've been trying to get this derailleur fixed for 3 days. Coulter walked over to the sofa and sat down. He looked at me, giving me a subtle nod. I sat down next to him. Not on the other side of the room, not on the armchair. Right next to him, our shoulders practically brushing. "Toby, we need to talk to you," Coulter said. Toby looked at Coulter's serious face, then looked at me. His eyes darted to the non-existent space between our shoulders. He blinked. Once. Twice. "Oh," Toby said. "Yeah, oh," I breathed, bracing myself for the explosion, for the betrayal, for the loss of my best friend. Toby picked up a rag and slowly wiped the grease off his hands. He looked at the floor, then back up at us. "How long?" "A few days," Coulter said honestly. "But it's not a joke, Toby. It's real." Toby let out a long, slow breath. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "You realize he's a disaster right now, right? He eats dry cereal at 3 in the morning, and his truck is currently held together by duct tape." "I'm aware of the vehicle situation," I said, a tiny knot of tension loosening in my chest. "And you," Toby pointed a greasy finger at Coulter. "If you mess this up, I'm taking his side. He's a better friend than you are a brother." "Noted," Coulter said, a genuine laugh escaping him. "Fine." Toby threw the rag on the coffee table. "Just don't be weird on the couch. I still have to sit there." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was grounded in dirt, rust, and the awkward reality of adult life. Coulter still had to go to the warehouse that night. He still had a mountain of debt and a bruised ego. I still had to figure out my own future beyond the bookstore. But later that night, sitting on the rotting wood of the back porch, things were different. The oppressive summer heat had finally broken. Coulter sat on the top step, smoking a cigarette. I sat between his legs, my back resting against his chest. His arm was draped casually over my shoulder, his thumb lazily tracing circles on my collarbone. It was quiet. It was steady. He didn't need to be the invincible older brother anymore. And I didn't need to pretend I didn't care. We were just two guys sitting in the dark, figuring it out one day at a time. And for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't looking for an escape route. I was exactly where I wanted to be. Did Lazaro and Coulter's grounded, gritty romance hit you right in the chest? Sometimes the best love stories aren't perfect fairy tales. They're messy, real, and happen when you finally stop running from the truth. If you loved this deep dive into complicated feelings, hit that like button to let me know. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that vulnerability is brave. And don't forget to subscribe for more deeply human, emotional audio dramas every week.